and welcome back, or just welcome if you're new here. We honored the first 40 days. This is not something that is that well known in the Western culture, but it is the importance of transitioning from maiden to motherhood and for baby from womb to world. This is a very critical time for mother and for baby, and in my opinion, it should be a sacred time, a time that is of critical importance and that should be protected, in my opinion, at almost all costs. Because I believe that it lays the foundation for motherhood and for baby entering the world. Some people may see honoring the first 40 days as a luxury, where your women in your life come to your home. The elders would typically come to your home. They would care for your other children. If you have other children, they take care of your home. They bring you food, and then you would just stay in your cave, healing and bonding with baby. And I mean, yes, if you can make that happen, but that's not the world that most of us live in, and that's not the world that we lived in when we honored the first 40 days. When we did it, we had just moved to a new country. We'd been in a new country for 4.5 months. We didn't have a community here. We'd made a handful of friends, but they're not like deep established friendships, and we had no family here. We also had no domestic support or no kind of services in the house like we typically would have back in South Africa, and having just moved to a country, we also had a lot of expenses, so it wasn't a financially flush time in our lives. What I'm saying with that is we had many reasons not to honor the first 40 days, as in many things that we could say, oh no, I can't do that because just moved to a country, don't have family here, don't have domestic support, don't have the finances for it, and so forth. But we didn't. We made it work. I believe that we adapt as necessary to our circumstances, to what we can do, but we don't forego honoring the first 40 days just because there are some challenges that we are not able to live it out in the traditional sense. To my mind, it's not a luxury, it's a necessity. So in this video, I'm going to share how we prepared for the first 40 days, given all of the challenges that we had. I might also share a few things that in hindsight I would have done differently now having been through it, and maybe some things that I might have done more or less of. But my hope with this video is that it gives you some ideas as to how you can adapt to honor the first 40 days given your circumstances. Just a quick disclaimer for this video, I'm sharing my opinion, I'm sharing what I did, I'm sharing my experience, but none of this is me trying to push my opinion on other women or tell other people what they should or shouldn't be doing. Please take what serves you and leave what doesn't serve you. I quickly want to address a very important consideration before I get into the really practical things of preparing for the first 40 days. And that is the decision of whether or not to have your mother or your husband or your partner's mother present at your birth or arriving shortly after your birth. I think this is a big decision that should really be considered by you and your partner, and you can discuss it with your parents if that's the type of relationship that you have. My mother and I and my husband made a very intentional decision of no, that she would not be present during the birth or shortly after the birth. The reason for this is, yes, I know that it is very helpful to have your parent there to support you, to help you adjust, to maybe do things around your house, to cook food, help with laundry, and practically, yes, very helpful. But for us, the main reason of no is not the consideration of what would be the easiest. It was, what do we believe would be the best for the transition for me and my husband, and of course baby, from going just the two of us to a family of 3. Now, my mom is very helpful, and she would have been amazing with me, and she would have been amazing with baby. And I believe that that would have then detracted from my husband's transition from not being a parent to becoming a parent. And that it was important for the 3 of us to find our way and to find our rhythm and generally just, I'm going to use the word transition a lot in this video, but transition to what is our new family setup. So if my mother was here, she would be amazing with a baby because she's had children, and that might have taken away from my husband learning or going through some of the things that might not be easy, but I believe are necessary as part of the transition to becoming a parent and us becoming a family of 3. I have many friends who opted otherwise to have their parent there, and they found that to be very helpful. I'm not saying it's not helpful. I'm recognizing, of course, practically, it is probably very helpful. But it does change the dynamic in your home if you're not someone who lives with your parents. Obviously, if you live with your parents, that's different. But it changes the dynamic in your home. To have a third person there, and then often when their parent would leave, be it a month, 2 months later, they would say, oh, but my husband can't do anything. I'm struggling so much now that my mom has left. And often there is a lot of words of criticism towards their husband not being able to fulfill the role that their mother was able to do. But of course they're not going to be able to do it because they weren't doing it. And there was another person in the home. So it's just worth considering not what is necessarily going to be the easiest, because I don't think that easy is always best. I believe that we need to consider what is going to be the most meaningful for you and your family to transition into your new little family unit. And for us, that decision was for my mom not to be present. My mom came later, and by then we had already established our rhythm as our little family of 3. For future births, I may make a different decision here, and I may ask my mom if she'd be willing to come, but that is something different because I'd be asking her to come to be with Elba, not to fulfill the role of assisting me with a newborn or the things that my husband did this time around. And that again would be different for me because I'm not going from maiden to mother. I'm going from mother to second mother, which also is a very important transition, but I think slightly differently because I've already then established the foundation with my husband. Right, once you've considered who's going to be in your space and who's going to be there, now we can move on to the practical things around preparing for the first 40 days. So first up, I read the book, The First 40 Days. It's nice. It's a nice reminder to honor the first 40 days. It's really nice to read how this practice is established in different cultures, how it plays out in different countries, what is traditionally done, and it gives some really good ideas for recipes. Although I know that some people criticize the book to say the recipes are a little bit out there, but I still think it's nice to have ideas. So my opinion of this book, it's a nice book. It's like a pretty book. It's a hardcover book. The writing is quite small, loads of nice pictures. I don't think it's a necessity to buy it or to read it if you are low on time or low on resources. My sort of disappointment with the book is I think that I would have wanted a lot more practical tips and maybe really more things around like the practicality of how to honor the first 40 days in a modern society. It does give loads of tips, but I think I wanted more, and I guess that's why I'm making this video. Now having done it, I'm hoping that I can share a bit with women who want to honor the first 40 days and who also want a little bit more practical tips. Anyway, I've linked it down below. I think it's a nice read. I don't think it's essential to read in terms of preparation. Next up, we bought a chest freezer. They are bulky and they are ugly, and I don't like having it in my house, but they are crazy practical for the first 40 days and also thereafter. So we bought one when it was on sale. We didn't buy the most expensive one. It isn't a nice item to have in the house, but it is very, very useful for the preparation for the first 40 days. I spoke to other women, and one of their main things around why they did not prep food was they didn't have a chest freezer or space to put the prepped food. And then in hindsight, they did express that life would have been a bit easier had they prepped some food. So a consideration, maybe if you don't want to buy one, I do think that they're useful. So I do think it's worth buying one. But if you don't want to buy one or you don't really have a lot of space, just make space for those first 40 days and borrow one from a friend or do something to have it in that time to be able to stock up food. Next thing we purchased a ridiculous amount of glass food containers. Of course, you could go for the cheaper option and buy like some plastic containers, or if you haven't just moved to a new country, maybe you already have containers, but we had just moved to a new country and didn't have glass containers. We bought a lot of them new. We bought some secondhand. For me, I was not going to put my food in plastic. This is from an environmental perspective, but this is also from a health perspective. I tried really hard to avoid plastic touching my food, especially when I'm serving warm food into a plastic container or wanting to heat it up. And again, this is something where someone will say, oh no, like the cost of glass containers and so forth. This was something that was important to us, so we made it work. We had just moved into a house in a new country. There were loads of things that we did not buy, but prioritized something like a chest freezer and glass containers because we wanted to honor the first 40 days and we did not want to use plastic containers. So there were rooms in our house that we hadn't finished furnishing. so that we could buy the stuff that we thought was more important. There's still loads of areas in our house that are not completed yet because we prioritize spending money on different things. Next up, for 2 months leading up to birth, we essentially spent every single weekend or many times when we were cooking, making extra food that we could freeze for the first 40 days. So we went to the market and we sourced whatever we needed to be able to make food that we thought was nutrient dense and healthy and good for the first 40 days. And then we spent the time making it. Essentially, it was loads and loads of broth, various types of bone broth, and stews and cottage pie, and then some organic spelt flour muffins, because that's something I like to eat. It's a nice, easy snack for me, and I can't think of what else right now. I also spent time sourcing what I would consider as healthy snacks and drinks. In hindsight, I feel like I did not source enough healthy snacks. I don't think I realized how much I would be snacking in the first 40 days relative to eating large meals. I really wanted to eat like smaller things, and I felt like I didn't have enough healthy options that I felt were good to eat in that time. So in hindsight, I would have done more snack options. Then teas. Tea is a big one. I sourced the various herbs and herbal teas that I wanted to drink in the first 40-day period. But for me, I don't like to drink herbal tea. I don't like the taste of it. So I turn it into like a berry tea. So I buy dried fruit or dried berries, and then I add whatever herbal teas I think are good. The ones that I used mostly was red raspberry leaf tea, oat straw, nettle, and rosehip. I also had loads of adrenal cocktails, so I made sure to have the supplies for that. The adrenal cocktail that I prefer to drink is fresh, not concentrated orange juice, a 50-50 ratio of that with organic coconut water without things added to it, and then mineral drops. Then I had loads of milky cacao as my warm drink, because the other two I was typically having at room temperature. 2 things we bought a little bit late, in my opinion, was a flask for when I had rooibos tea or when I had many of the milky cacaos, as well as a tray for Ian to bring all the things from downstairs to upstairs. So essentially, in the preparation, I just planned to have all those supplies, and if my husband wasn't familiar with the recipes or how to make any of that stuff, then I explained to him how to make it, where all the things were, and how I like to drink those beverages or eat those snacks. Right, next up, plan for everything that is not vitally important to just not get done in the first 40 days. I think it's important to consider that you shouldn't see the first 40 days as a time where you adjust to motherhood while still trying to maintain everything else the way that it's usually done. So an example is that I usually do the admin in our home. That's like scanning in documents or payments. Whatever didn't need to get done in those 40 days did not get done. It got put in a box for me to do at a later stage. Whatever in our house didn't need to get done, whatever chores, whatever admin didn't need to get done, just plan. This is vitally important. These are the things we need to prioritize. Everything else can just wait. Next up, you need a husband or a partner that buys into the importance of the first 40 days to play the supportive role and to really see it as a sacred time for you and for baby. Now, I'm not sure how that looks in terms of your relationship, but for us, this was a discussion that spanned over preconception throughout pregnancy. This wasn't something that I needed to convince my husband of right there at the end. This was something that we had over years discussed the importance of. But if you're watching this video and you're like 7 months pregnant and you need to make sure that they see it as a sacred time, there are maybe resources, maybe videos, maybe the book that you can share with them to really explain that this is such a critical time. It is such an important time for you to be in your protected little cave bubble with you and your baby. So often people will tell me, oh, why don't you pump and then your husband can give baby a bottle to give you a break. That kind of stuff was not happening in our home. What was happening was my husband supporting us in the first 40 days by doing everything else that I could focus on: recovery, transition, and baby. Skin to skin with baby, breastfeeding with baby. No him trying to give bottles or him trying to help me by doing the motherly role at that point, but rather him doing everything else in our home: the laundry, the dishes, taking care of our pets, bringing me food 3 or more times a day, making sure that I'm constantly nourished and doing whatever he could to support me so that I could care for our baby. It isn't a book that's on the first 40 days necessarily, but I do think it is a book worth reading by you and or your partner to really understand maybe the physiological aspect of what it means to transition into motherhood. And the book is called The Nurture Revolution. So if at any point you get around to reading that, I think that really does detail what a critical time this is for you and for baby. Of course, also for your spouse, but I believe that they play a role in supporting you to take care and nourish your baby. So in our first 40 days, not once did my husband complain about bringing me food 3 or 4 times a day, countless times making sure, do you have enough stuff to drink? Have you eaten today? Have you done this? Can I help you with that? Always constantly making sure that I had loads of nourishing drinks and food. And then he also took care of our pets. So that brings me to the next preparation, and that is if you have pets, and of course if you have other children. I didn't have other children, so that's why I haven't focused on that in this video. But of course, if you do have other children, you'll need to plan for who is going to take care of them, or how is their transition from maybe an only child or having 1 or 2 siblings to the transition with the baby and your attention being more on the baby. Anyway, in our case, we only had pets, 2 cats. If we were still in South Africa, hands down, I would have paid a pet sitter to come to our house, either be it once a day or every second day to just help out with that, especially if we had a dog that required going out for walks. Thankfully, it was winter and our cats didn't have that requirement, but I think it is quite difficult for a spouse to do everything for me so that I can care for baby, but then also take care of our pretty needy pets. Nonetheless, my husband did that. So one of the things we did in advance to make things easier for him there is that our cats are fed a raw food diet. So we just essentially made sure that all that food was prepped and he didn't still have to do that in the first 40 days. Next up, the house chores. I think what isn't critical must wait. So really to only focus on the critical things. Things like the kitchen being clean because that's where your food is coming out, the laundry because that is what you need to be done. Maybe everything else can just wait. In our case, Ian cleaned everything, but the preparation that I would recommend is looking into ways that you can, in the first 40 days, lessen the house chores that your spouse needs to do, or if they're not typically doing them, finding ways for them to be able to do them in that time that makes it easy and not such a strain or a burden on them. In our case, Ian has always been incredibly hands-on with house chores, so there was nothing that I needed to teach him or show him or make sure he knew, but I have spoken to loads of friends whose husbands don't typically do those things where they needed to teach them or show them or kind of make a list of like what typically gets done when. Things to consider getting, depending on your financial situation, is if you can afford domestic help, I would recommend getting domestic help in terms of just making sure your kitchen is clean and doing like some of that kind of cleaning. So I know that there are people who typically don't use domestic help at all, but will get it for their first 40 days. Another thing to consider is what will make cleaning easy. So one of the things that we purchased after Elba was born, but in hindsight would have been really helpful if we had it at birth, was a robot vacuum cleaner. That was one chore that we could then outsource to a robot. But yeah, I will recommend try to brainstorm about how to make chores easier or what chores don't need to get done. One of the nice things is if you're preparing a lot of food up front, there shouldn't be that much cooking that is happening. It will mostly be just heating up food or putting together food, which means there's not that much kitchen cleaning. Two of the helpful things that we did is I bought a magnetic whiteboard that we stuck to the fridge or the freezer. I'll link it down below. It's pretty useful. And on that, we marked on the right-hand side, the middle, and the left-hand side, what exactly is in the freezer, how much of what. So you don't have to kind of like be scrambling to looking for it. If your partner or spouse is someone who doesn't typically take major responsibility for the meals in your home, mine does, so this was not something I needed to do, I would recommend getting one of those and actually making a meal plan for the first 40 days to say, hey, these are the options that you can serve me in the first 5 days. These are the things that I would really like in the next week. Because if you read the book and if you look into it, the important thing is in the beginning is to do warm for the first 40 days, do warm. Everything needs to be warm. I'll discuss that in a moment. But you ideally want to stick to quite liquidy foods like soups in those times. And as you're healing, your digestion will start to pick back up. Then you can start to incorporate maybe like some rice and other things that are slightly harder to digest than just soup, because your digestion is coming back. So if your spouse is not so inclined with the food stuff, I would recommend get another one of these magnet things and then make a food list for them, or some kind of way to meal plan to make it easy for them to be able to just bring you things. Because also, I don't think that you want to be sitting there in your first 40 days thinking, ooh, what do I feel like eating today? It's not something you want to spend your brain capacity on. You kind of just want their nice, hearty, warm meal. Then the other thing that I purchased that I thought was pretty cool, and we've been using it until today, is compostable labels for our glass containers. So these are amazing. From an eco-friendly perspective, that's why I got them. But the reason I think that they're amazing is they are so wonderful in terms of just dissolving in water. So you can put them in your dishwasher, you can just put them in water and it will completely dissolve. And that's really nice because I don't know if you try to take labels off, it's pretty annoying. So I thought that that was a super random, handy thing. Next up, what do you need for you more than what I already described now? And what do you need for baby? Source the things that you need before the time. You don't want to be running out to a shop, but if you do need something later, either your husband goes, you ask some friends to drop it off, or you get a company to deliver it to your door. Please don't leave the house to go to the shop for things. An important part of the first 40 days, but I'll make a whole video on things that I believe are valuable to a mother in the postpartum period, is warmth. Stay warm because this is a cold period. Your basal body temperature drops. So you need to stay warm. No matter what season you are in, you're birthing in the middle of summer in a tropical place, great. You still have to stay warm. It's important for your healing. It's important for your milk supply. So even if you're going to be so tempted to just stick to cold foods like fruit all the time, I strongly recommend you don't. No matter how hot it is outside, please try to eat soups and stews and that kind of stuff. But with warmth also means no padsicles or those like frozen pad things. I'm a big advocate for free bleeding and not taking additional pain meds and doing all that stuff, obviously, unless you really, really need it. But for me, it was absorbent pads that I used in birth, I used them post-birth, and I used them for elimination communication. Now, as well, they've been wonderful. I'll link them down below. So there was absorbent pads and then reusable menstrual products because I'm iffy about what touches me and I didn't want like plastic touching me. If I was going to use disposable pads, I would have got organic unbleached ones for that period of time. And then we had loads of towels from birth, which were also being used. So there was a lot of laundry that my husband was doing in that first week because it was all of the laundry from birth and then all of the laundry from all of the fluids that come after birth from you and from baby. So make sure that you have whatever you need to do laundry. You're stocked up on detergent. Laundry, by the way, was the first home chore that I took back to doing post-birth, but it was very easy for me to do. It's right outside our bedroom, and I wanted to do it because I was doing cloth diapering, and I felt that that was a very nice therapeutic act. Next up, no walking up and down stairs. You got to find a way to avoid the stairs if you've just given birth. Your pelvic region really needs time to heal. So the important consideration here is, where's your cave gonna be? Where's the space that you are going to be with your baby? We picked upstairs in our bedroom for a few reasons. One, we don't have a full bathroom downstairs. So our bedroom has an ensuite bathroom with a bath, a shower, basin, all of the things that I need. Also, it has a king-size bed that is very comfortable. And like I said, right next to our laundry facility. Not that that was a deciding factor. The other reason it was a no for me on the downstairs is because I believe that the first 40 days and longer, it is very critical to constantly be holding your baby, to having skin to skin, to be touching them, and you're also tired, and it's not safe to fall asleep on a couch with a baby. So I made sure that our bed was safe and completely set up in a safe way if I was ever tired, and for baby to be able to lie there and for us to be able to rest together. In hindsight, I think it would have been nice if I had maybe set up a bar fridge with like just a kettle or like a one plate heating thing in our room that I would be able to sometimes just get my own beverages or make myself a cup of tea, because I wasn't going downstairs so constantly if I wanted anything. that I would need to ask my husband for it. So that's probably something that I will do in a future birth, is just have like a tiny little setup of a bar fridge, one heating plate, or a kettle or a microwave or something. Anyway, the importance of your cave is that you need it to be very comfortable with only warm light, not bright lights. So in our case, that meant that the blind was only ever half open, never fully open in the first 40 days. The main light was also never on. The only light that was on was a salt lamp, and it was on pretty much for the entire duration of the first 40 days. And if I needed more light, then a side lamp or a portable night light. I really recommend getting a salt lamp, especially with a dimmable feature. That warm light is a very soothing light for you and for baby. It's very easy to sleep through it, sleep with it on. And just remember that your baby's eyes are still adjusting. So that's why you don't want brightness. So loads of people will say, oh no, but having bright light and the sun shining in is good for my energy and good for my vibe. Remember, this is the first 40 days of post-birth, postpartum. This is not your usual state. So of course, yes, bright lights and sunlight is nice, refreshing, energetic in a normal time of your life. But this is not a normal time of your life. Your baby's eyes are very sensitive to light, and that was the main deciding factor for me as to when I felt comfortable to no bright lights. Next thing. Plan to not leave the house. You need to try really hard not to leave the house. And I know that this is a very difficult one. Thankfully, in Canada, the midwives came to our house to do most of the checks. But if you do live in a country where that's not normal, try to see if before the time you can plan if you do want any checks. Obviously, you can decide if you want checks or not for you or for baby. Try to see if you can find a person who does home visit checks rather than you taking you and baby, who are both in a very sensitive state, out into a sort of bright lit, kind of sterile looking environment, which might not feel the most cozy and comfortable in your first 40-day period. Next up, I would strongly recommend very, very, very few guests. This is very difficult because I know that loads of people will want to come and visit your baby, but I do believe that it is very important that we take our well-being and the transition of our baby very seriously. This is not a social time in our life. Right after you've had a baby is a very vulnerable time for you and for baby. And I don't believe that it's a time where we should be prioritizing socials. The reason I'm saying you need to plan this, because I'll make another video of my experience of the first 40 days, but the reason I'm saying you need to plan this is I think that it's respectful to people in your life who you care about to let them know upfront what your preferences are, so that it's not an awkward discussion. Oh, I'd love to come see you and baby. And you're like, oh, well, actually, we're not having any guests. I think that it's more respectful to say upfront, hey, listen, we are honoring the first 40 days. What that means in terms of guests is maybe we'll let you know when we're ready to have guests. We understand that you're so excited to meet our baby. We're so excited for you to meet our baby, but we just need a little bit of time for us to transition as a family into this new role that we'll be having. So that's why I'm putting it under planning, is I believe that it's important to say, yes, we're so excited for you to meet baby, but these are just the boundaries that we need in the beginning. And if you are going to have guests, also, what are the boundaries that you're going to set with your guests? For me, in the first 40 days, nobody held Elba. There are other things that you might want to set because, for example, your baby needs to get used to your scent, and their senses, other than sight, are very, very heightened. So maybe you don't want people to wear perfume or any artificial smells when they come visit you or your baby. This is just an example. I'm not saying you need to do that. But what I am saying is upfront, you and your spouse, I think, need to decide how are we going to honor the first 40 days while being respectful that we have people in our lives who deeply care about us and want to meet our baby. And the other reason I'm saying prepare for this, because if you're someone who isn't typically used to saying no to people or saying no to guests or saying no to that kind of stuff, this might be something that you then need to practice doing. I really think that it is important to understand the hormonal dance that you're doing postpartum, and that when we go against the sort of natural order of things, the things that your body and your baby and you are requiring for this transition, which is a quiet, peaceful, not social time where you're really being nourished in a warm way, you're not being very active, you're not like out and about. I think when we go against that, we do pay the price for it. Maybe not immediately, but at some point, because the first 40 days is laying a strong foundation for motherhood for you, and then of course for your baby. Now there might be unavoidable things and things that you can't do perfectly, but the things that are within your control, I think really really need to be taken seriously. I'm not saying that honoring the first 40 days is a fix-all perfect solution to any problem that a mother or a baby might have, but I definitely believe that it is a strong mitigator against things like postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety and the general struggles that you typically hear people saying when they've entered into motherhood. I believe it makes a major difference. No, it might not be a guarantee that everything's going to go smoothly and everything's going to be easy, but I definitely think it makes a major difference. So my opinion is, where are you going to put your efforts? Are you going to put your efforts into prevention as far as possible? Or are you later going to put your efforts into dealing with the consequences when we are not honoring what is important in that initial period? And if you're not really buying into the concept of it being important, then I would recommend do the research of what is the hormonal changes that happen to a mother straight after birth. What is it that your baby is experiencing when they come from the womb to the world, so that you will recognize what a sacred time it does need to be, simply based off of understanding just the physiology part of it, even though I think that there is so much more to it. Okay, moving on. The next thing I think that you should prepare in pregnancy, or mostly in preconception, but then also in pregnancy, resources and information. It, again, is a very vulnerable time. For the first time in your life, unless this is your second baby, or third or fourth, you are going to be fully responsible for another being in a way that you've probably never been responsible for another being. And that can come with a lot of anxiety, a lot of insecurity, a lot of doubts, a lot of whatever. So I do believe it's important to research up front. What are the things that are important? How are we going to approach them? Read the books that you need to read, or watch the videos, or listen to the podcasts, or whatever your form of taking in information is, so that you recognize that the first 40 days is a learning phase, in that you are learning so much about yourself and your baby that you don't want to now be reading like a book on how to do a specific thing in parenting. So one of the things that I did, for example, is make a list of, if I needed assistance with something or I needed advice, who was I going to contact? Who was I going to call or ask for assistance, so that I didn't have those doubts? I think that straight after having a baby is not the time that you want to be doubting your parenting choices. So it was also the time that I was not open to anybody's opinion on my parenting choices. It's not a time I'm going to have that discussion with anybody unless I asked for their opinion. Next up, plan for a lot of skin to skin. This is a time where I really, really think that it is very important to be nude as much as possible with your baby skin against your skin. This is good for baby. This is good for you. This is comforting for you as a mother who's transitioning and healing. And this is so, so valuable for your baby as well. To feel your warmth, to feel your heartbeat and your just bodily smell, and all of that is very important. The reason I'm saying plan for it is, if you're not typically someone who spends a lot of time nude, this might feel odd to you. You might not know how to do it practically. So plan for, how does this look? Then, very much in line with skin to skin, is I would recommend that you look up how to bed share or breast sleep safely, whether this is your intention to sleep this way or not. Obviously, I believe that it is the most beneficial, natural way to sleep when done safely. I will link down below some resources in that regard. I've also done a book discussion with Jackie on the book Safe Infant Sleep by James McKenna, who specifically discusses breast sleeping. The reason I'm advocating that people plan for it, whether you choose to sleep that way or not, is that some people plan to sleep that way out of choice, or other people end up sleeping that way. And this is one that I've seen more often out of necessity and not choice, because they find their baby will not sleep anywhere other than on top of you, which of course makes sense, because your baby wants to just be on you and near you and smell you the whole time. So for me, that's natural that they're going to want that. Or it's for some people out of sheer exhaustion or for other reasons. they find themselves in a position where they were very strongly against bed sharing, believe that it's not okay and all of that stuff. And now they're living out something different and suddenly need to find a way to do it safely. The risks here are often not people who intentionally safely breast sleep. Often it is people out of sheer exhaustion who fall asleep in an unsafe way. So I really strongly recommend make the space where you and your baby are resting safe to be able to fall asleep. Know how to fall asleep next to your baby in a safe way. There are some resources in this regard. My favorite resource for this is Safe Infant Sleep by James McKenna, but then also the Lalicha League. I read their breastfeeding book. They have a bit about it in their breastfeeding book, but they also have an entirely separate book on sleeping. And then also the book Gentle Birthing, Gentle Mothering, written by a medical doctor. She also has a section on bed sharing or breast sleeping with your baby. And that brings me to my next, and I think final point. You need to protect your well-being at all costs. And what I would then recommend is get off social media or anything else that impacts your well-being. One of the biggest contributors to people's anxiety in the postpartum period is constantly being bombarded with fear-based content in the name of awareness. Become aware through resources like books, podcasts, whatever. Please do not use TikTok, Instagram Reels, or whatever short messages as awareness, because if you're on Facebook groups, you will see many posts a day of mothers saying, I saw this thing on TikTok, it's made me so anxious, I'm not able to sleep. I saw this one tragic story and it is so anxious, I'm not able to function. You need to protect your well-being. Become aware of safety things through different mediums, not one that is there for entertainment. And also realize what is a good idea to expose yourself to or not expose yourself to. So I would strongly recommend get off all media in that time. Yes, I still read books and listened to some podcasts and things in my postpartum period. Whenever I was feeling anxious about something, then I would go to a specific source, an expert in that, and I would listen to their content to feel informed, but not from a fear-based place. I really think that people need to get serious about protecting your well-being so that you can care for your baby. Your baby needs nothing other than you to be whole. So you need to say, what must I do in this period to protect my well-being? And if I want to be informed, what way can I be informed that isn't going to increase my anxiety? Because of course, from a hormonal physiological perspective, it makes sense that we are more sensitive to this thing can go wrong, that thing can go wrong. Of course, that is part of caring for another being. Like once you become a mother, those senses are super, super heightened. So we want to balance it between what is becoming aware for safety's sake and not sending you into a constant state of anxiety and panic and being afraid of things that you may not be able to control. So say, what can I do for safety? And the rest I need to then let go of. All right, then the final thing, I'm just going to conclude the video here. Plan for your 40 days and stick with it. The reason I'm saying stick with it is you will start to feel a little fidgety towards the end of it. Like the first part, I was like, oh, this is so easy. Of course I don't want to leave the house. Of course I don't want to leave the cave. I'm not even tempted to walk downstairs. But then you start to get a little bit fidgety. And then I think it is important to remind yourself to stick with the 40 days. Because you might feel a little bit more energetic and suddenly be like, oh, of course I can go out and do all these things and so forth. But then it might come at a cost. So it's important to just mitigate against that by sticking with the 40 days. And if you need longer than 40 days, do longer. Like you don't have to say, oh, 40 days, I'm supposed to be feeling great now. I'm supposed to be all healed up and, ready to run outside. Even after the 40 days was like my strict period. But even after that, it was a very gradual transition for me. I didn't like come out of my cave after 40 days and like go back to normal life. So I recommend also being aware of yourself. But if your awareness of self is like, oh, I've got loads of energy, I can do all these things, please don't. Please still take it slow. Because even if you've got loads of energy and you can do the things, maybe your baby still needs you to stick to your cave. And maybe they still need a lot of calm and so forth. So be aware you and be aware of baby. I would say a minimum of 40 days. And so for some people, maybe plan even if you need a bit more time or longer. That's okay too. Don't put any pressure on yourself that by 40 days you must feel right as rain to just like go do things. Anyway, I believe that it makes a difference. I believe it makes a major difference to how I have experienced the transition from maiden to motherhood. And pretty much everybody that I've ever spoken to that honored the first 40 days had a very different newborn experience to the one that we are so used to hearing about, that is filled with like exhaustion and pain and coping and surviving. I haven't spoken to someone who's honored their first 40 days who had that type of experience. It's a much gentler way of going into it, and you're honoring rest. So you might be a little bit tired because your body's done amazing things and you're caring for an infant, but it's not the same as like the major exhaustion that you typically hear around motherhood and a newborn. Anyway, that's just my experience. If you've got questions about the first 40 days, because I will make another video on this and my experience of this, and answer any frequently asked questions or help in any way that I can for anybody preparing to honor this time, because I really believe that it is such a sacred time, please pop them in the comments below and I will do my best to add any value that I can. And that brings us to the end of today's video. I hope that this video gave some ideas, and I recognize that I'm quite passionate about some of the stuff, so it might sound a little bit more, I guess, dramatic than I intend to. It's from a passion space, not from a preachy space. And it's really just because I believe this time is so important, and I believe that women who have just birthed should be protected in their little cave to allow for that time. And given that we live in a modern society where that's not so easy to do, I genuinely hope that some of the things that I said in this video allows you to see how can you do this given your circumstances. Anyway, if you like this video, please like this video, and if you like my content, remember to subscribe to my channel.